From the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations, Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. But slavery and the slave trade in their crudest and most vicious forms have not been eradicated in this 7th decade of the 20th century. Stories appearing in the press of the world attest to this tragic fact. This is London, which in recent years has become a center of agitation against the hypocrisy that makes it possible for slavery still to exist. Strong voices against modern slavery have been raised in both houses of the British Parliament. One eloquent and persistent voice is that of Robin Maugham, noted novelist, and as Viscount Maugham, a member of the House of Lords. In his home in London, Lord Maugham talks of the traffic in human lives as he has learned about it at first hand.
Some 8 years ago, a friend of mine who was attached to the Trucial-Aman levies told me that he had discovered young children in fetters in the Buremi oasis. Those children were slaves in transit for the slave market at Riyadh. I was appalled. The fact shocked me. So I determined that I'd try to do something about slavery in the world today. 5 years ago, entirely in order to prove the existence of the slave traffic, I made a journey into the Sahara. And there, I bought a slave from his Tuareg master for £37.10, and I set him free. It seems unbelievable in the world today that I bought a human being for £37.10. That was his price.
I know that your books, articles, and speeches have received worldwide publicity, but nothing seems to have changed.
Alas, no. The governments of Great Britain and the United States have done almost nothing to bring about the end of the slavery that I've proved still exists. Why? In one word, the answer is oil. For example, the United States has vast oil interests in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the largest slave-owning countries in the world. As a result of America's influence in Arabia, the civilization of the Cadillac has superseded the civilization of the Quran. Britain does nothing about it because she, in her turn, is afraid of offending Washington. And she doesn't want to offend the slave-owning countries that have still not ratified the UNO Convention on Slavery. The world, by and large indeed, preoccupied as it is with the menace of atomic war, has sunk back into apathy so far as slavery is concerned. I'm not a sociologist and I'm not a politician. I'm just a writer. Perhaps that's why I don't only think of it in terms of world politics. And perhaps I'm just selfish about it. But in an odd kind of way, I don't believe that I can feel myself completely free while there are men and women and children who are still in slavery.
Oil. Its flames light up the night sky above the Arabian desert. Oil. It catapults an ancient nomadic people into a modern world of time clocks, of fences, of factories, and of machines. It turns shepherds and farmers into artisans and mechanics and cogs in an assembly line world. It studs the desert sand with cracking plants and refineries, and laces it with endless miles of pipe. And its billions in royalties line the coffers of the sheikhs and princes who own the land and the people, and who have happily taken to a way of life their Arabian Nights ancestors could hardly have imagined in their wildest dreams. A life of pomp and magnificence, of armed guards at every point, of fabulous banquets served on golden dishes, are water rich too, and in the desert water is even more precious perhaps than oil. Water for the sheikh's horses, water for his fountains, and for the groves of date palms that yield both fruit and shade. Shade meant, among other things, to hide these temples of the desert from prying eyes, though not from our hidden telescopic lens. Beyond these guarded walls are ultra-modern villas, swimming pools, huge gardens, and harems filled with concubines and slaves. The prestige of a sheikh can be gauged by the number of concubines and slaves he owns. Kuwait, with a population of scarcely 300,000, takes in close to $3 million a day in oil royalties. Not that these millions are allowed to trickle down, but to raise the standard of living of the people, of the Fellahin or the Bedouins. Instead, oil has brought in its wake a new biblical curse. It has raised the price of human flesh. Storage tanks and pipelines add a new and modern decorative touch to the vast emptiness of the desert. But they provide no sustenance for the people who live nearby, in hunger and misery and desperation. Water is precious, and the camel is precious. And to give the camel a rest now and then, water is drawn by slaves. These girls, 10 to 12 years old, are blindfolded to keep from getting dizzy as they take turns with a camel. The most modern equipment available is used to extract oil from thousands of feet below the surface of the earth. But water must be drawn by the effort of human slaves. For luckier children, there are model schools inside the palaces. The pupils pray before lessons begin. We are permitted to film the pupils as they come out of the royal school. More than 100, we are told, are children of the sovereign himself. Following them are the children of the princes and high dignitaries. They're clean, well-disciplined, happy children. But note that some of them do not carry books. These are children of the oil rich. Their books are carried by their personal slaves. Slaves received as gifts from their parents on their birthdays. Slaves who will grow up alongside their masters and serve as their personal gods. Most of these are children of palace slaves, and according to the law, they too are slaves. The oil millions turn into automobiles from Detroit, parking lots, and traffic cops who direct traffic straight toward the desert. Darkest Africa, as in the past, is the chief market for the sale of slaves. Here, the geographical and psychological roots of slavery spring from the depths of the earth. Primitive peoples are dominated by religious terror, which imposes on them an irrational obedience. It is easy to pass from this state of the mind's subjection to the state of true slavery. In Bobo, a village in the Republic of Upper Volta, we watch the rites of initiation into manhood of boys who have reached the age of puberty. Already they are totally under the control of the witch doctor. Already they have taken the first steps in the direction of slavery. The ceremony lasts 3 days. Its final act is that of circumcision, performed by the tribe's elders. Some of the youngest boys from large families are selected for emasculation to increase their value as harem gods. Such boys may bring from $4,000 to Banfora, on the banks of Lake Chad, has been suffering from drought. The women, symbols of birth and of life, invoke the god of fertility in ancient traditional dance and beg him to send rain to the parched earth. But the witch doctor's spells and reliance on superstitions steeped in tradition are not the only justifications for slavery in Africa. Extreme poverty and the misery poverty brings are other likely causes. And there are communities where conditions are so appalling that slavery can appear to the potential slave as a blessing. We travel along the edge of the Sahara to reach the Peuls, a pastoral people once numerous and powerful, now reduced to a few thousand by mass raids of slave merchants early in this century. They no longer have any cattle of their own. The great herds they lead to pasture are owned by Arab merchants. And the Peuls are so impoverished that they willingly offer themselves in slavery to the owners of these herds. But since they cannot all be taken, the young shepherds show their masters which are the strongest and most courageous among them by submitting to flagellation. The herd owners gaze impassively on the scene, enjoying vicariously the sadistic action before them, and knowing that the strongest will survive. and the survivors smile and smile and pretend to ignore the pain. They fall on their knees and beg their Arab masters to accept their services. The fishermen of the Evi tribe go out on the open ocean in the same fragile boats they formerly used to fish the lakes of the interior. Each day they risk their lives for a handful of coins. To earn a little more, a bridegroom does not hesitate to auction his bride on their wedding night. In Chad, a young woman is sold into marriage by her father for 100 salted loaves. The United Nations Convention on Slavery lists such a sale without the woman's consent as an act of slavery. In the Volta Republic, 4 women may be worth a horse with harness. But they must be young, beautiful, and well-dressed. This little girl is worth exactly 70 empty bottles. Even if she could read the United Nations Convention, it would hardly be of any help to her. Nor would its provisions against mutilating, branding, or otherwise marking a slave help this woman, dressed in rags, who totters along with her ankles in chains among the crowds in a large city. This is Porto Novo, capital of Dahomey. We are going to a fishing village on the lagoon of Cotonou in Dahomey. This lagoon has a lovely fairy tale look, and its inhabitants contribute to the fairy tale quality as they gracefully toss their fishing nets onto the waters. But there is nothing of the fairy tale about the harsh struggle for existence of the people of this village, who live exclusively on the fish they are able to catch in the waters that surround their stilt-propped homes. The village is famous in this region for the beauty of its girls, but the lagoon provides only a meager living at best, and many of the male children urge their parents to get rid of the females, the least useful members of the community for work and fishing. Whenever one of the girls disappears, they say that the crocodiles have kidnapped her. The fishermen believe that these crocodiles are the incarnation of their ancestors, and they are therefore held to be sacred. The children look upon them as close relatives. A girl has disappeared. Her father makes a fine show of lamenting and weeping. But if ever the expression has had a true meaning, these are crocodile tears. Actually, the girl has not been a victim of the crocodiles. Her father has simply sold her to a slave dealer. Where do these girls end up? Sometimes they are bought by men from nearby villages and become part of the material wealth of the new tribes. But more often, they are spirited away to the Arabian Peninsula to become concubines in the harems of the desert princes. West to east, across the heart of Africa to Arabia. This is the great highway of slavery. Across these desert trails, we took our cameras for thousands of miles in search of secret caravans. The governments of the young African republics are doing everything in their power to wipe out the slave trade. Every day, military units on camels check the border zones. They pursue the caravans and examine the documents of the desert buses. Any of these may be engaged in the slave trade. On the border of Chad and the Sudan lies Fada, the base from which the camel patrols set out. Helicopters keep watch along the border. And we have been permitted to accompany the police on one such inspection. Yesterday, pilots spotted several caravans heading toward the wells of Kairouan, the only wells within a radius of 200 miles. All caravans leaving Chad to enter the Sudan must stop there to take on water after checking in at Fada. One caravan that suspiciously avoided Fada has moved into the throat of Kairouan, a bottleneck deep in the mountains of Enedi. Water surging from the springs here cannot evaporate because the high mountain walls keep out the sun's rays. We reach our objective. There is no escape from the throat of Kairouan. It is a dead end. At first, this caravan looks like any other moving from place to place. Camels line up for a drink. Bedouins sit motionless, impassive. The police approach with their interpreter and get permission to search the merchandise. The interpreter notices an odd-shaped bundle with a canvas cover. Where were they taking these children? What market were they headed for? The slave dealers won't talk. The children don't know. So the police are unable to find out. and they lose a possible chance of closing off one more market in human beings. A government official gives us an interview on the subject of slavery.
شوف يا سيدي بلدنا كتير كبير 8 مرة أكبر من
I can assure you, he says, that slavery does not exist in my country. The first official act of my government when it came into power was to draw up stringent laws against slavery. But our country is large, very large.
شوف
Look at the extent of our borders. Our army and our police do everything in their power to patrol them. But it does happen that the law is violated on occasion. Can you tell me of a single country in the world in which the law is never violated? But here the law may be violated too often. Recalling Lord Mohm's account of his purchase of a slave, we decided to try an experiment of our own. We prepare. 2 cameras are hidden at a safe distance. A microphone is buried out of sight. Above all, we bring money. We don't have to wait long. The dealer shows up with 2 women we have told him we want to buy.
How do you do?
How
do you do?
Fine. What is the name of this one?
This is Margaret, and this is Mary.
For
300 pounds, 300 pounds. Look, have you seen? Fine.
The experiment has succeeded. We set our slaves free. Like Lord Mohm, we have no use for them. But the chances are good that they will have to seek a new master if they are to survive. You don't have to hide yourself in a forest to buy a slave. You can buy one on the outskirts of a large city as well. This is an African city at night. One gigantic flop house. A huge bed of misery and desperation. We have been told of a house that sells its merchandise to the biggest traders in Eastern Africa. Our informant leads us there through narrow streets and back alleys. The place looks just like another tourist trap. A bit of local color, watch a girl being bargained for by a rich merchant passing through town. This is indeed a trap, but hardly a tourist trap. We are in the neighborhood of the oasis of Ahila, on the edge of an airfield abandoned after the war. An old plane lands, and simultaneously a truck emerges from the darkness. The pilots, too, are left over from the war. Overaged, many of them Europeans unable to compete in a new world of jet aviation. The plane takes off at dawn. Do the pilots know what cargo they are flying and where these children end up? We find our answers in a small local pub in London, where we have an appointment with a former RAF pilot. We show him our pictures. After a few drinks, we gain his confidence. He confirms what we have heard rumored in Africa. He names names and places. He tells us where he took off, where he picked up his human cargoes, where he landed, what happened to the young boys and girls he flew out of Africa and into Arabia.
Kanu. Do you know Kanu? Somalia, Sudan, Egypt. And here, the Arab states. That's where all roads end, Arabia. Oh, I've been backwards and forwards a score of times at least for this sort of stuff. It's a hell of a lot of bother, I can tell you. But it pays. And I needed that money. It's sort of charter jobs with cracked up planes. But they pay.
The truly great opportunity for the slave traders lies in the pilgrimage to Mecca. Mecca is the heart of Islam, and Islam is the third religion in the world. Show me one single Muslim country where slavery is not practiced, Prince Faisal of Saudi Arabia once said to a journalist. An idle challenge. For even if slavery is against the strict rules of the Quran, even if in the repeated words of Muhammad to his followers, there is nothing that pleases Allah more than the freeing of slaves, even if all Muslim lands have officially abolished slavery, in practice the custom resists all efforts to sweep it away and is instead on the increase. Each year, 1 million human beings set out in the direction of Mecca. They come from India, from the Middle and Far East, and above all, from Muslim Africa. All their lives they have dreamed of this pilgrimage, which is to be the key that will open the doors of paradise for them. But for many of them, it is nothing more than a tragic journey on the road to slavery. Investigations indicate that some 300,000 men and women remained in the Arabian Peninsula between 1950 and 1960. Some had set out for religious reasons and had simply not had enough money to return home. Others remained because the head of their tribe or their relatives had sold them without their knowledge to merchants disguised as Islamic missionaries. But many more simply had stepped forward to meet their fate with the full consciousness of what lay ahead for them. Slavery in the land of the Prophet being preferable to a miserable existence in an African village. At Port Suakin, we board a boat that will take 14 hours to cross the Red Sea. We ask the captain how many pilgrims his vessel is carrying.
Well, I should say about 800 or 900 people.
Where do these people come from?
They come from all over Africa, from all parts of Africa. From Nigeria, Chad, Ghana, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan. Poor people without a passport, and in some cases, even without a name. Men, women, children, old people. Many of them are sick, and they would be happy to die in the holy city.
After the pilgrimage, will they all go back to their countries?
Well, really, I don't care about these problems. You see, I only carry them, yes.
Thank you, Captain.
Not at all.
The first mate is as disinterested as the captain in the fate of their cargo. It's a job, and it pays better than any ordinary seafaring job.
Grazie.
Prego.
Several days later, we board a plane bound for Jeddah, a landing point for travelers to Mecca. We ask an officer on the plane the same question we had asked the captain of the ship. He simply hands us the passenger list. 20 persons on the flight are traveling together. Men, women, and children. 12 have round-trip tickets, and the other 8 one-way tickets. These 8 are in effect living traveler's checks that will be cashed in to pay the expenses of the return for the rest of the party.
They are women, servants, and children whom the 4 Arabs will sell as slaves. Their destiny as human travelers' checks has been decided years ago, and now they are carrying out that destiny.
Sunset after sunset, the sun drifts away behind us as we plunge on toward the east. Which of these is to be sacrificed? This one? This one? That one over there? Mecca, holy city. According to tradition, Abraham was tempted by the devil on the spot where this stone stands. The faithful hurl rocks at it in memory of the ancient victory of good over evil. More than 100,000 tents spread out toward the horizon on the largest campground in the world. People of all races and languages are here to join the great community of Muslim brothers. For the first time in history, a motion picture camera is inside Mecca to record these remarkable pictures. But the cameraman we have assigned must himself be a Muslim. A non-believer might find his life in danger. Religious feeling runs high. But even here in the Holy City, some of the most notorious slave merchants operate. Not far from the loftiest symbols of a great religion, there is a street called the Slave Market. The Kaaba, the house of God, built by Muhammad. Every year, the number of pilgrims increases. Black Africa sends approximately 500,000. Not all of those who fail to return are doomed to slavery. Some find work in the oil fields. Some never reach Mecca at all. We are flying over the Red Sea, trying to locate an island mentioned in an Aden newspaper story 2 years ago about some pilgrims who had been sold and then abandoned. There had been 12 of them, fallen into the hands of an unscrupulous guide. There is not a drop of drinking water on the island. Now the only living inhabitants are giant crabs. And every day at high tide, they crawl along the beach to rummage among the bones. We may be the first visitors to this island since the tragedy. Fishermen along the coast avoid it. They say it is cursed. At last we find what we have been searching for 6 months along the Persian Gulf. An open market in human beings. This one takes place in the courtyard of an old fort. 3 men and 3 women are on sale, all Africans. They appear resigned to their fate. slaves come from black Africa. They can also be procured on the Arabian Peninsula. Sometimes all you have to do is organize a party, the kind the British have called slaving parties. We hear about such a party in Qatar. There's music, dancing, laughter, the kind of entertainment that doesn't take place every day in the desert. The girls come out of the shelter of their homes. They arrive from nearby villages. The canny organizers of the party have accomplished their purpose. They can study the girls at their leisure, decide which ones they will try to buy from their fathers or their husbands, which ones they will have to kidnap. Slavery, we are told, has been abolished. In point of fact, it still survives. A newspaper story leads us to the Greek, a well-known brothel keeper who operates in a number of African cities. Not satisfied with the normally large profits of his trade, the Greek has devised a cunning scheme for doubling them. In a small villa on the outskirts of an African city on the Red Sea, he gathers the children of his prostitutes in what is officially called an orphanage. Actually, it is a training school for slaves. For the first few months, the mothers can visit their children. Then, the Greek takes over, rearing the children and training them until they are old enough to be of commercial interest to the traders of the Middle East. Prices vary according to age, color of skin, and the work the child is intended for. An attractive half-caste girl of 12 may be worth as much as $5,000. We have been told that a mysterious but important personage is due to visit the Greek today. We wait, and he finally arrives, unaware of the telescopic lenses that are following his every move. He is a buyer come to examine the Greek's merchandise and to purchase the best of it. These little girls will eventually land either in a harem or in a brothel. If they look happy at the prospect before them, it is because their training under the Greek has led them to expect a life of wealth and ease and love.
We are sorry to have to drag the United Nations into it again, but there is something we must add. We have the evidence of this British officer, Lieutenant Marlon Steele of the 37th Military Police District of Maridi. On the morning of May the 6th, 1963, 5 Kivu slave traders were arrested. They are guilty of having used these instruments of torture on 15 Bakudo children so as to reduce them to such a pitiful physical condition as to arouse the generosity of the passers-by. We are sorry and ashamed to have to insist on showing this terrible document. This young British officer who is collecting evidence is sorry and ashamed too, but it is his duty. Just as it is our duty and that of the whole civilized world, or the world that calls itself civilized and feels smugly at peace with its conscience and with God, to consider this an accusation, to stop this cruelty.
A bustling city. Its streets crowded with automobiles, its byways crowded with brothels. There are male prostitutes here as well as female. The brothels are openly advertised. And here the oil-rich princes, bored with their harems, can refresh their jaded palates. In Beirut, the nightclubs increase in number year after year. That modern, westernized version of the East's Dance of the Seven Veils, the striptease, provides the chief entertainment. Spain, Germany, Italy, from all over Europe, dancing girls eagerly flock to Beirut, not unaware of the dangers, but also not unaware of the opportunities. We talked to a French girl. We ask her why so many European girls in her profession come so willingly to Beirut.
Signorina,
Because, she
da quanto
answers,
tempo lavora a Beirut?
for us, Beirut is a fairy tale city.
Beh, le striptease?
Come mai le ragazze
In what way, we ask?
vengono così volentieri a Beirut?
You can find a husband here,
Beyrouth est un peu ça.
Ma favola, in che senso?
or a millionaire boyfriend.
Elle est millionnaire.
Anche
Is
lei,
that what you're hoping for, we ask?
Oui, pourquoi pas.
lei diventerebbe volentieri una delle tante mogli di un principe arabo.
Sure, she answers.
Mais
Why not?
la vie.
We ask her if there's a chance she might enter the harem of an Arab prince.
Sono
Oh, yes, but not permanently. Let's say on a contract for 4 or 5 years.
Non. Mais j'espère...
This girl dreams of real pearls and a rich husband. If she acquires either, it will likely be inside a harem. But what is a harem? Back in London, we tracked down a young woman who knows the answers and who may be persuaded to give them to us. Her name is Eve Kenneth, and several years ago she made headlines all over the world. For Eve Kenneth spent 2 years in the harem of a sultan on the Arabian Peninsula. Now she lives in a less than elegant neighborhood in London. No longer a harem favorite, but struggling to stay alive.
Yes, for 3 years I was the legal wife of the Sheikh Abdullah El Nabaka. And there were 20 of us down there in the harem at Nagaput. I know of other houses that my husband had in various parts of Arabia.
Where did you actually meet your husband?
Oh, in Baghdad, I was working in the office of an insurance company.
Were they happy days when you look back on them?
Well, yes, at first they were, really. We traveled a lot in Vienna, and Paris, Rome. Well, yes, there were wonderful times, really, but all of a sudden I found myself abandoned, just there in the desert, left to myself, with nothing. And I feel my husband's left me in the lurch. Here I am in this house with nothing. Do you think it's right after 2 years in the desert?
No, not at all.
Well, in any case, I'm suing him through the government of Saudi Arabia. I've asked for £10,000, and I'm sure I'll get it. Now, I've got something here that might interest you, if we can come to an agreement.
We buy the film. These are the concubines of the harem. Miss Kenneth tells us that each one costs about $2,500 if she is bought as an adult. But many are the daughters of slaves, and these cost nothing. Only the sons born to a slave and her master are born free. The women generally find harem life dull and uninteresting, and they are thrown back on their limited resources to pass the time between occasional visits from their lord and master. We are in southern Arabia. We have left Aden and are headed for Hadramaut in search of the city where Eve Kenneth lived for 2 years. The roads are dusty. The temperature is over 100 degrees. We are expected at the frontier that separates the Sultanate of Shaban from that of Seun, and we quickly pass through the barrier. "12 hours later, we are at Seun. It is here that Eve Kenneth lived, in the great palace of the Sultan. Built with blocks of chalk, the palace contains 1,000 apartments for the huge family of the Sultan, and countless numbers of smaller rooms for his 400 concubines and his 1,000 slaves. Most of the hundreds of windows are closed. Only with a telescopic lens can we pick out signs of life inside. Seun, vast, imposing, incredible chalk skyscrapers crumbling in the sun. And nearby, thousands of chalk tombstones in the stillness of a cemetery. In Arabic, the word harem means forbidden, and the most intimate secrets of the harem are jealously guarded by religious principles and by tradition. But in Africa, things are different. The Sultan of Zinda invites us into his private apartments. And so, for the first time, motion picture cameras cross the threshold of a Muslim harem to record the intimate details of Muslim family life. But the Sultan is careful to allow in only our still photographer, who is a woman, and one white-haired cameraman. We meet the Sultan's wives, 6 dignified ladies dressed in costly silks. They have never been photographed before, and they are intrigued by our cameras. In the palace, the Sultan tells us, there are room for 90 more women and more than 100 children. It is hard to feed them all. They have such healthy appetites. But the children are a great consolation. That one there, she's the Sultan's favorite. The Kerdi are an agricultural people who live in the Cameroon mountains to the north. The Sultan of Kerdi has his harem too, but with a difference. His palace is surrounded by tall towers of terracotta that are actually silos filled with grain. In each silo lives a woman who not only guards the grain, but who is also part of the harem. And these women never grow old. The secret? Quite simple. By the Sultan's order, each subject must hand over his grain to the Sultan immediately after each harvest, and with it, any engaged daughters. The girls remain in the harem for 1 year to guard the grain and to serve their lord and master. At the end of the year, they are released to their bridegrooms, and their places are taken by new girls. Today there is a celebration in the village in honor of a new arrival, a 12-year-old girl. For 1 year, she will belong to the Sultan, body and soul. Although the harem as an institution remains a living reality, some keepers of harems, more modern in their orientation, prefer to maintain theirs in secret. In Pretoria, we meet a businessman, Mr. Joko, in a hotel bar, and he invites us out to his country home. Mr. Joko operates his business out of a modern office on the top floor of a skyscraper in the city. Out in the country, he keeps an efficiently run harem, far from the prying eyes and possible criticism of his business associates. It is a pleasant existence to have the best of both worlds, the modern world of business, the ancient world of the harem, with so many solicitous, devoted, and above all, silent wives. We head north to the edge of the Sahara to meet those once fearsome desert horsemen, the Tuaregs. There are only 4,600 Tuaregs left. But in their camps, there are 1,700 slaves, one for every 3 Tuaregs. The Tuaregs abhor manual labor, thus their need for slaves. And their wives, beringed and bejeweled, may provide tea for their husbands, but otherwise are every bit as lazy. The Tuareg harem differs from others. It permits no concubines. Only wives may live in the sacred interior of the tent. But the Tuaregs do keep concubines. They simply keep them elsewhere, perhaps in a nearby village where their masters visit them bearing gifts. The fatter the woman, the more she is prized. In the desert, laziness is a luxury few can permit themselves. this last remnant of a once proud race, prestige is still the most important thing in life. And prestige consists of 3 items: wives, camels, slaves. Once the Tuaregs fought other desert tribes to capture the slaves they needed. Now fighting is out of style, and the slaves must be bought, often at great sacrifice. These children will cost from $125 to $150 each. They will become part of the family of their Tuareg masters. For the hardships of desert life unite masters and slaves in a single community. We are the guests of Alamido of the Cameroons, who has organized a ritual ceremony for us, a ceremony out of the ancient past. 30 slaves, bound hand and foot, must submit to a cavalry charge by 30 other slaves armed with spears. It is called, with justification, the trial of courage, because the object is for each horseman to sink his spear into the earth as close as possible to one of the bound targets. Spiritually, the slave is a dead man, and he exists only to work and serve. But the trial of courage can restore to him his dignity as a human being, and even his liberty. Here come the victors. Freedom is theirs, at least until necessity forces them to search for other masters. We move on to Abomey, to the palace of King Tanyi. His family once held the monopoly for the sale of slaves to the Portuguese, and his grandfather had 6,000 wives in his harem. But King Tanyi is rather more modest. He has only 20 wives. Today, the Council of Ministers and other dignitaries join King Tanyi, all 308 pounds of him, in the audience chamber. The ministers have little to say, and this they say with great deference. The king listens, and then he speaks, his silver-nosed mask giving his words an unearthly quality that is supposed to represent the voice of the ancestors speaking through him. But there are also earthly duties for the king to perform. One of his subjects, who lives in the city, has returned to get married, and he has to ask the king's permission. The king must be fully informed about the bride, where she came from, and the conditions of the marriage agreement, and he must be paid a marriage tax, in less legal language, a payoff.
Makedi nabi. Ira itambe anoma kine dawati. Kara su kana ni bela kana kam. Yandi.
This is the bride, and this is her dowry: a bicycle, a sewing machine, and an assortment of slaves. The formalities are met. Everything is in order, but not quite. King Tanyi's brother, accompanied by his wives, tells the young bridegroom that another payoff is expected. This one is pocketed by the Minister of Finance. Pretoria. The sign says that Europeans and non-Europeans are urgently requested not to attend the Amaleta fights, but we bring our cameras in anyway. These fights are hardly sport, hardly even a competition. More accurately, a savage massacre. For these men who work in the diamond mines, their masters have devised these inhuman fights to allow them to let off steam. At least here they are free. Free to batter each other into insensibility. And these too are free. Free to indulge in one of modern civilization's more ennobling contributions to the welfare of mankind, the twist. Now all the rage in the nightclubs of Lagos. And this girl is free. Free to dance a fake primitive dance, an imitation of an imitation, for the benefit of tourists who cannot be expected to react to the real thing. Brought its benefits to many African women. A sheath dress against a background of skyscrapers. A dime store headdress. Comic books and prostitution. In the dank, forbidding world of prostitution in Africa, the word freedom cannot be used in even a nominal sense. For these women are literally slaves, totally owned by masters who have bought them and for whom they work. But genuine freedom has come to many areas. And here on the west coast of Africa, from whose shores millions of slaves were dragged from their homes in chains, we find their great-grandchildren, now free men, coming down to the Atlantic Ocean each Sunday to pray for their ancestors and to give thanks for their own deliverance. Heavenly Christians, they call themselves, and they maintain that the salt waters of the ocean are the tears of their forefathers. They fill bottles with the sacred water and drink it in prayerful memory. As they sing, they summon up the spirits of all those millions and millions of slaves who have lived out their lives in past centuries in bondage. They sing, too, for those still in bondage and yearning to be free. Today's slaves, who will remain on the conscience of a disinterested world until that world no longer averts its eyes and instead opens its heart.